All right, welcome everybody. Today is March 22nd, 2022. The time is 1:06 p.m. This is the time and place for the second board workshop on draft regulations on consumption lounges. We appreciate the participation and the folks in the room joining us today. So I would like to note before we go to public comment that we're joined by Chair Douglas, Member Merritt, Member Durrett, and Member Nylander from the Cannabis Compliance Board here. So we certainly appreciate the board's participation in this as well. So with that, we'll start first with public comment. I would like to note, and I'll do a little run of show after the public comments, that we're going to have a public comment period after each regulation that we discuss. And so we'll start here with a general public comment. We'll also end with a general public comment period, but there will be multiple opportunities after each regulation for you to also provide additional comment. So with that, we'll move on to agenda item number 1, which is public comment. And so I'll ask if there's anybody in Las Vegas wishing to provide general public comment. Please come up to the podium now, state your name for the record.
Good afternoon, Amanda Connor from the law offices of Connor & Connor. In general, I wanted to comment and thank staff for all their hard work. You can tell that a lot of time and effort was put into these regulations and taking into consideration comments from the workshop in December and since then. However, I would like to comment that I still think there's a lot of work to be done before these can be finalized. In fact, there's things that contradict in the regulations, which I'll bring up as we go on specific regulations. But I would just encourage the board and staff to really listen to the industry and to the interested parties today so we can make these regulations even better and have great regulations for Nevada cannabis industry. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Scott Rutledge, Argentum Partners. I'll be speaking today on behalf of the Chamber of Cannabis. I just wanted to use the opportunity to say thank you as well. We appreciate you guys listening to some of our feedback and working with us through this process. I wasn't sure where we should bring this up in the operations, and I apologize that I was just reminded it was something we've talked about, and then I forgot to include in our written comments was a question about free samples. The idea being that if you go to let's say a bar and a brand wants to release a product there and share a sample of that product that's provided for in that setting. We know these aren't the same as alcohol establishments, but something that we'd like to look at is if there's a vehicle by which we could provide for samples when a brand would like to introduce a new product into the marketplace. So I might bring that up again during operations if I think there's a section where that maybe should live, but either way, I thought I should put that on the record now. And thanks again for all your work.
Chris Anderson, Solid Consulting, representing Planet 13 Holdings on all items and Hardeen on some of the items. Just wanted to thank the board and staff for all the work that clearly you did since our last workshop in December. We've come really a long way, and wanted to thank you for that.
Good afternoon. Nicole Buffong. I serve as a board of director for the Chamber of Cannabis and Western Regional Director for Minorities for Medical Marijuana. Diversity and ownership for the independent consumption lounges will bring new and innovative ideas to the marketplace. Consumption of cannabis is not a one-size-fits-all. From deep tissue massages or in your favorite smoothie, the cannabis plant has many modalities of consumption that complement its proven medicinal properties that do not always include smoking the plant. I'm excited to see what these new and I hope diverse independent owners will bring to the cannabis industry in Nevada. Attracting a new audience that comes for a unique and enjoyable cannabis experience in Las Vegas. Thank you to the CCB for keeping diversity and inclusion at the forefront of these regulations. I really appreciate all your hard work. Looking forward to discussing. Thank you.
Director Clemis, and esteemed members of the board. My name is Brianna Padilla, and I serve as an advocate and the Secretary of the Chamber of Cannabis, in addition to my professional involvement as an ancillary service provider and business owner whose work is focused on developing opportunities for women and underserved communities in the cannabis industry. I wanted to thank you for your work in facilitating these workshops, and I also wanted to to make a comment. As the CCB continues the demanding work of promulgating regulations that will strengthen and improve actionable access to cannabis licensure while maintaining and elevating our industry's integrity in the process, I wanted to speak to my support in regard to the requirement of licensees to promulgate and present their plans of prioritization when it comes to equity, access, and diverse representation. As your most recently released demographic survey highlights, there is an urgent need for action and ideation when it comes to executing the mandates of equity and diversity. Realistically, there has always been an onus on our licensees to give back to the communities that they are serving. That being said, the tangible impacts of that onus are a fraction of what they should be. This additional requirement by the CCB is an extension of that onus, but also an opportunity for our licensees to intelligently, empathetically, and effectively articulate how they plan to reinvest in the communities who need it the most. By incorporating this requirement for lounge licensees, you're ensuring that equity and diversity remain and will remain a priority after it is actually achieved. Further, by requiring licensees to submit these plans to the CCB and to work with local and national organizations to develop them, we are also creating an opportunity to build a robust data set of policies and regulations that have the potential to give our regulators and our industry the framework of a foundation, both locally and nationally, for how to build policies prioritizing social equity and diversity in cannabis. We need to begin by listening and learning from what works, but without action, the change we wish to see will always be a dream. I do not want to see Nevada as another failed equity experiment, and I believe that the steps the CCB and our industry are taking together are steps in the right direction. Thank you for your time today.
Is there any other public comment in Las Vegas? We'll go to Carson City. Is there anybody wishing to provide public comment in the first general public comment period in Carson City?
No public comment at this time.
Okay, thank you. So we'll move on to agenda item number 2, and similar to the last workshop, Deputy Director Michael Miles will be going through all of the regulations, this time really focusing on the changes that we've made since the last workshop. As I mentioned earlier, there will be, if you're following along, look for the letters on the agenda. So after each letter, the regulations, there'll be a public comment period. Deputy Director Miles, I believe, may take a couple of them together just because there's minimal to no changes. First example will be on agenda item number 2. We'll likely take A and B together, Reg 1 and Reg 5, because they go together. But outside of that, each regulation will have its own public comment period. Please keep any comments, obviously germane to the regulation, during that comment period. We may ask you some clarifying questions or comments. You may ask us to clarify things. We may send out clarification after the workshop if needed. So again, we appreciate you being here. Did I miss anything on run of show? Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started. Deputy Director Miles is used to this, but I'm going to say one thing before I kick it over to him, because there are 2 changes that I want to point out and give a little context to in agenda item number 2, and those 2 are on diversity and social equity. The provisions around diversity that you do see in this version are different than those in the last version. And what has happened since then is no less than hundreds of hours of work put in collectively by our team and legal counsel in reviewing these provisions. And what you see now in this version is what we consider to be our best, most defensible step forward in our desire and mandate to work to increase diversity within the cannabis industry. When we set out developing, reviewing, and analyzing these diversity provisions, we wanted to make sure we could put forth regulations that successfully help to launch our diversity efforts, right? And that it would be something that we could continue to build upon. What we're trying to accomplish here is to lay the groundwork, is to establish that foundation towards a more diverse industry. And so what you see here, and this is achieved now in the form of obligations by applicants regarding diversity and their role in creating greater diversity required upfront at the start of the licensing period, something that new applicants will need to discuss and present as part of their final review in front of the board. And additionally, we removed the liquid capital requirement upfront, the $200,000, and replaced it with an attestation that funding can and will be secured. So by lowering what we know is a major barrier to entry, we're hoping it results in a larger, more diverse applicant pool. That is not to say that capital will not be required to open a business, because it will be. And realistically, it's going to be a lot more than $200,000. But let's consider the approach that allows for all individuals to have the opportunity to apply for these licenses and work to secure those funds and prove to the board that they have an appropriate business plan that will allow for them to operate the business successfully. And so I wanted to make sure that that was clear on the diversity changes. And finally, on social equity, the major change that we see here is opening the applicant pool to those who qualify as a social equity applicant nationwide. So again, we performed extensive research on these issues and the issues that have been challenged in other states across the nation. And we are working here to put ourselves in the best position for these programs around social equity to succeed. So with that, we'll turn it over to Deputy Director Miles to go through the changes to the regulations.
Good afternoon. My name is Michael Miles. I'm the Deputy Director of the Cannabis Compliance Board. Director Cannabis just went through some of the main changes through the diversity and our social equity plan. So let's just jump right in. We're going to start off with the application regs, which includes Regulation 1 and Regulation 5. In Regulation 1, I'm just going to go over. I'm not going over every individual update. I'm just going to go over the important changes that we made since our last workshop. Right, and there are two proposed updates that clarify prospective and conditional licenses, as you can see from the updates to those definitions. Again, I want to stress the process we're going through. The prospective and conditional licenses are just statuses while you're working towards getting a final license. The prospective license for the individuals are going to be once you've been selected, once you fill out the application is approved, and you've been selected by the random number selector, then you'll get a letter saying you received a prospective license, which is just a status. At that point, you're going to move towards a suitability check through the board. You're going to have investigators contact you. You're going to have a lot of documents to provide. We're going to do a full suitability analysis. You're going to give a presentation in front of the board at the end of that suitability analysis. At that point, if you're approved, you'll be granted a conditional license, and then you can move forward towards opening, getting your local improvements, local requirements taken care of, and then hopefully at that point we'll do the final inspections. You'll get granted the final license. You can open up. Again, these aren't major changes to the conditional or prospective. They're just clarifying language. That's all. Let's jump ahead to NCCR 5.020. And this is also just a housekeeping update regarding the posting of the new application period. We just needed to change it. The rules have changed of late. So we just updated that regulation. 5.040, which is our main application reg. It also goes through the process of the prospective, conditional, up until the final license. Again, we've updated some language to make this reg a bit clearer. We used many of the comments from the prior workshops, such as expanding the time the point of contact has to reply to the board. We made it 2 work days instead of 24 hours. We also expanded the time to gather required documents that the board needs for a suitability check from 30 days to 120 days. We changed the capital requirement, as Director Cannabis discussed, that you don't have to have the $200K up front, but you do have to have it before you be granted a conditional license. Other than that, the main updates were the diversity plan in here that Director Cannabis spoke about. Next one's 5.055. This is the social equity requirement. Again, Director Cannabis also spoke about this. It's been updated to include areas from outside Nevada as well as inside Nevada. 5.060 was updated to make it clear that an applicant must still qualify for a prospective license. And again, this is just the reg that if there wasn't enough applicants with the amount of licenses we have to hand out, you still need to have the prospective license. And I did fail to mention, and I want to point out, because I actually made a comment about it that was caught on open mic, and we received a few comments about it. The retail establishments, when they get their prospective license, they're obviously not going to have a random number selector. We're going to have a separate area on the ASOA login area. When you're selecting the application, it's going to be selected for a retail attached license, and you still have to fill out the application just like everybody else, just so we can double check. After we double check that all the information is included, we will send you a letter saying you've been granted a prospective license, because there obviously is not going to be any random number selected for that. 5.065 is a brand new reg, and this lists the requirements needed to reduce the license renewal fees for consumption lounges pursuant to AB 341. Uh, 5.085 is an update to the reg allowing extensions to the 12-month period where a licensee must obtain a final license, just like if you've been paying attention to the board meetings, what we've been doing for the last, 3-4 months. 5.110 is a new regulation concerning the transferability of consumption lounge licenses. Pursuant to AB 341, licenses can't transfer a lounge license until after the lounge has been open for 2 years, open and operational for 2 years. This new reg will allow you to transfer up to 49% of the shares in order to raise capital, but the original owners must maintain 51% ownership of the license. It also discusses what happens if a licensee passes or is incapacitated. And that's all for reg 1 and 5 on the application regs. Does any member of the board have any questions as to the regulation changes?
I have a comment. Should I go ahead and make that now? Member Durrett?
Absolutely.
Similar to the last workshop, I don't think we should outline the process for future licenses at this time. I think we should take those as they come and have more time to deliberate on whether it makes sense for all license types. I also don't think that people who would want to follow along with how other license types are awarded are necessarily following along with how the consumption lounge licenses are being awarded. For example, if they're interested in cultivation, dispensary, they're not necessarily watching this process to make sure that they're on top of changes. And so I don't think they're fully aware that whole process could be changed right now. So I think that the board has enough, I don't want to add more to anybody's plate, but we do have enough bandwidth to deal with those down the road and not combine them all in this process.
I will point out, just agree completely. We'll point out right now there is no regulations for the application of any license type. This is the first that is being created under the CCB.
Yeah, and so I do think we have to get to that point. I just don't think we should combine it with the consumption lounge licenses, because we're thinking about consumption lounges right now. We don't have those other license types in mind, and there may be other issues connected to those, and maybe somebody could bring those issues forward, but they're not even aware that they may not even be aware that they're on the table right now, because they think just consumption lounges are on the table right now. So I don't know if we have a wide enough audience for this issue, and I just can't come up with scenarios that may need to be addressed right now, because those aren't on the table right now. We're not looking at dispensary licenses or cultivation licenses right now. So I can't even think far enough ahead to know what those issues would be.
Thank you very much. Any other questions or comments by the board? All right, now we'll open to public comment. Do we have any public comment as to Reg 1 or Reg 5 on the application process? Mr. Anderson, you moved to the front this time.
Learned my lesson. Chris Anderson, representing Planet 13 Holdings. I did submit a public comment on 1.193, and I know others did as well, potentially removing sales facility licensees from going through the prospective license process. Since the board has a lot of our information, data points already versus someone who's brand new to the industry, it seemed like an elegant solution at the time. Maybe there's a little more discussion required, but I do think that hopefully we can find some ways to. And I know you spoke to potentially having a separate section on the application site for retail licensees versus non-retail licensees, but just hoping to see some of those, the more kind of arduous requirements, like fingerprints, those are permanent. So hopefully we wouldn't have to go and get every board member fingerprinted again, things like that. Thank you.
Afternoon. My name is Paul Michael Burgess. I'm a business owner here in Las Vegas. Afternoon, Chairman Douglas, Director Climas, distinguished board members. I have a question on the social equity application. When you speak of sending ideas, how does the board want to see that? Is it in a legal format or in an investor's pitch deck format? So that process has a certain way so the social equity applicants, if they're going to send an investor pitch deck, it's 10 and it's very explainable and understandable, giving people to give their ideas, or do you want it in a legal format? So that's my question on social equity applications.
Good afternoon, Scott Rutledge, with our Argentum partners on behalf of the Chamber of Cannabis, for the record. One, wanted to say thank you for spending so much time trying to figure out a way for this industry to look at diversity and look at social equity, and to do so in a way that's defensible. And I know what you mean by that, because looking across this industry in different markets, all of the litigation that has occurred around specific set-asides and license types, and it can't be easy, especially as we're trying to diversify this industry, as we grow this industry. To that point, I know it was a comment made by Member Durrett regarding how maybe not to apply this application process for all future licenses, but I know that most of the clients that I work with, including the chamber, they're aware of these hearings or discussing this, that this is something we're contemplating right now. And so if someone's not aware, I guess what I would say is, if it's going to create any sort of a delay in moving these regulations forward, I would prefer not to change course right now. If it can be done, I don't think it's necessarily problematic for us, as we've stated before, I think at the December hearing. But if it's going to delay this process, I mean, I guess I could come back and petition the board later on for a change to that regulation. But I think it's incumbent on every operator to be paying attention to what's happening here. And so if they're not, then I guess they'd have to come back later. But again, if it's possible to do it without a delay, I don't think we'd have a problem with that.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. Aisha Goins with CEIC. I just have a couple of points that I want to make. Thank you for your time. I also appreciate staff for all the hard work, dedication, long hours, deliberation. I haven't had to pick it in front of you, so I think you guys are doing a great job so far. What I wanted to point out is in 5040, the diversity plan, I think that the concept makes sense, but I'm concerned with staff's ability to follow through on holding the licensees accountable. And so what I'm proposing is that those diversity plans are able to be made public so that the community at large can hold the licensees accountable for those plans. This way we ensure that diversity is citywide and statewide, and that those licensees do what they say that they're going to do. Also, with the requirements for social equity, it breaks my heart. I'm not going to give a speech, but it breaks my heart that Nevada doesn't get precedence for these licenses. And I've already shed my tears for my community and mourned some possibilities for some people. So what I'm going to ask in lieu of that is that we require those social equity licensees to become residents of the state of Nevada within 6 months of receiving a provisional license. I can't imagine someone that we say is in this arena could actually successfully run a business not being a resident anyway. What I don't want is I don't want revenues for this program to leave the state of Nevada. I think we should be thinking about how we're recycling the dollar. I've always said that one of the smallest misses, which turns out to be the largest miss, is not having micro business models. It's because small businesses are the foundation of America, and they make up 48% of all employment in America. And so when you don't have small businesses, you minimize opportunities for real growth. And so what I want to make sure that we're doing is thinking about that as we're thinking about the dollars recycling in Nevada. We've seen how hard the pandemic has hit Nevada, and we want to be thinking about diversifying our economy. And in doing that, we want people to be committed to our economy. And so I want to just ensure that we're thinking about how to keep those persons as a part of our fight, make them accountable to this industry and being whole in this industry. But those are my only two things I'd like to suggest. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Christina Ullman. I serve as the president of the Chamber of Cannabis and a market leader here in Nevada. Thank you for the extensive thought, research, and public input the board gathered to create consumption lounge venue regulations. Legalizing this license type will put Nevada at the forefront of cannabis commerce and entertainment, as well as diversifying the numbers of owners and C-level leaders in the market. It's high time more people are given the opportunity to enter this market and bring their creative and entrepreneurial skills to our community and to our industry. In the last 15 months, over 400 industry professionals and 70 businesses have united to create the most diverse 501c6 cannabis business trade organization in the state that not only represents the people building this industry, but it also represents the people that respect the plant and acknowledge our privilege to make a living in the cannabis space. We at the Chamber of Cannabis urge you to approve and enforce the proposed regulations that support new licensees delivering their diversity, inclusion, and equity plan to the board before approving them for a license. This strategy will help change the trajectory of the industry and the ownership that may now truly be reflective of the consumers of this plant. Thank you so much.
Thank you. That's why we told Mr. Anderson to sit in the front last time.
So you'll learn sometime. But. All right. Well, Will Adler here representing Silver State Government Relations. Briefly, we heard about conditionally approved licenses and that process at the last meeting, but we have conditional licenses. Just for the record, that is not companionatory in any way, this new definition at all.
It is not.
Excellent. All right. And then just a follow up with what board member Durrett did say. I do feel like there's a lot of linkage to all license types in this, whereas there might be further, developments and regulations and laws and things that have additional license rounds that aren't similar to the lounge licensing process. This was a very in-depth and thought through process at the last legislature when it came to lounges. And the thought that maybe we have to have some other license model similar to what White Pine County petitioned, some other model that wouldn't have as many steps in its sense. So would these regs sort of mandate that all further licenses do go through these rounds for clarification on kind of what she was saying there, or is this just strictly lounges to date, I guess? Both.
You wanna go?
Well, this is proposed for consumption lounges and would go for all licensing, as Deputy Director Miles said. This is the first time licensing is addressed in the NCCRs. So
Okay.
you can envision an evolutionary process, and there'll be opportunity to make tweaks or make this specific to lounges if that's the way the board wants to go as well. But this is the starting point.
Just like Mr. Rutledge said, you can bring a petition if you want to change it, or we may update it depending on what the legislature wants us to do.
Great, because yeah, my comments is maybe it's a little inflexible for all license types, considering the previous license grounds, but something to look into, and whether decoupling it now might be speeding up the lounge process going forward for lounges, and then talk about the other licenses later could work well. Just commenting there. Thank you.
Thanks.
Good afternoon, Amanda Connor from Connor and Connor PLLC. I have very specific comments to specific sections. First, starting with 1.069, the definition of board member. The definition only applies if you have ownership. Currently in Nevada cannabis regulations and requirements, board members, which is the elected governing body of corporations, are required to be vetted, approved, and obtain agent cards irregardless of ownership. Therefore, this would be a significant change in the current regulating process. We would eliminate several people, although they would be governing the operations, that would need to come forward for suitability and vetting. I want to make sure that that's clear and that it would apply to all license types, which was just confirmed by Executive Director Klimas that these definitions would apply to all license types. So we would be changing who we suit and find suitable to operate and govern the licenses. Similarly, with section 1.132, officer is now defined to only be officers, if this was approved, to be only officers of publicly traded companies. Again, currently in our regulations, all officers, regardless of if it's a privately held corporation or a publicly traded company, must come forward for suitability and vetting. This definition would mean that all private company officers who are making the day-to-day decisions of the operations would not have to come forward for suitability and vetting. Moving on to NCCR 5, the specific regulations, specifically looking at 5.0401B. Applicant is used throughout this, but applicant is never defined. I would strongly encourage the board and staff to consider defining applicant, as that was one of the key issues in the retail store litigation, was what was the definition of applicant, who had to come forward and fill out the information, who had to provide fingerprints. All of that stuff was litigated in, and yet applicant is not defined here. With 5.0401B3I, it requires that an applicant say to meet the minimum scoring guidelines that they sign an affirmation that they will meet or will secure liquid assets. And then later it says that their application can be withdrawn if they can't provide proof, but there is no timeline in which they must secure that. So there is a timeline of 12 months to get operational, but before that, they have to go through conditional licensing. I would strongly suggest that it be clarified how long they have to secure that. Subsection, still in 5.040, under subsection 4, it requires that they verify that their location meets the distance separation at the time the application is submitted. However, this application process contemplates that land use approval will not be obtained until after the prospective license is granted. That would require then that they get a survey that backdates and goes back to verify that the distance separation was met. It again was another issue in the retail store litigation that I would consider the board to figure out how you verify and attest that something meets distance separation if you haven't yet gone through the local land use process. Under subsection 6I of 5.040, there is a contradiction. It says that you must respond no later than 48 hours or 2 business days. 2 business days is not necessarily 48 hours because the weekend could be in there. That contradiction, I would recommend being cleaned up. Under 5.040, subsection 9, it requires that they apply for an agent card. Currently, you cannot apply for an owner, officer, or board member agent card through the Cannabis Compliance Board system unless there is an license number that you must submit with the application. Acela will not let you apply for an owner, officer, board member, agent card without a license number. Therefore, either the CCB needs to amend their application process for agent cards, which would require amending those regulations, or address how fingerprints can be submitted without this process. I believe I'm still in 5.040 now, subsection 11. It requires that you submit the last 2 fiscal year financial statements. But what if the applicant or company applying is a newly formed entity? Many of these independent consumption lounges will be newly formed entities that will not have 2 years of fiscal financial statements. Again, now I'm trying to find 5.040. 16, I believe. It again has the must respond no later than 2 work days, parentheses, 48 hours. Again, that's a contradiction that I'd recommend be cleaned up. I believe the 2 work days is fine if you remove the 48 hours. I just think 48 hours and 2 work days contradict. With regards to the subsection 4 of 5.040, talking about the appeal of a denial, I'd recommend in there, it does not refer to any of the trial or administrative hearing steps in the other regulations, and simply just says that it must be heard. I think the process for how to file that when responses are due should be addressed. And lastly, in section 5.085, it talks about extenuating circumstances. I just referred to previous comments made by Member Durrett asking that extenuating circumstances be given a definition. I think it would be really helpful for the industry to have some understanding on what that may mean. Lastly, I would suggest, as others have, that if the retail adjacent consumption lounge application process is going to look different, meaning it has its own section, it doesn't go through the random number generator, all of those things, that it be addressed clearly in the regulations that it is a separate process. Thank you.
And Ms. Connor, and thank you for your review and your comments on this. It may be helpful, and I think you have them written down. If you could submit those in writing with any language that you had, would be helpful for us to just keep track of those.
Will do. Unfortunately, I didn't finish my review till about 2 a.m. this
That's all right.
morning, so, but I will work to get written.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, we did get a lot of the comments at 6, 7, 8 o'clock last night. So
Sleep.
surprise, surprise from a bunch of attorneys.
Good afternoon. My name is Frank Hawkins. I am one of the owners of Nevada Wellness Center, and I'm here to make some comments. I also, like everyone else, want to thank you for all of your hard work. And I have more questions than anything else. I do want to speak to a couple of things that was just mentioned. The item or the issue of the board member. And based on past litigation, it's my understanding prior to this new reg is that the board member wouldn't be counted. And what I guess I want to try to explain is if you have a board member in the past applications, some people use those board members, minorities, to get minority points. So if you have board members and they don't get credit or apply for the diversity, because technically a board member may work for a company and they made them a board member. They may be somebody they know and they put them on the actual board, but there's no meetings. I don't think those are the kind of board members that a public company may have. But in that regard, I think based on the previous litigation is that position owner is okay, officer is okay, but board member, if we're talking about points, I don't think you guys should consider that. The question about applicant as well came up in the prior litigation, and the applicant or the individual. So that's been batted around a million times because there is no clarification if they are one and the same or if they're individual or different. So I would say, since you are creating these new regulations, that be ironclad so we don't have to revisit that in our state going forward. And then land use. I thought I read something that talked about just identifying the locality, because I can tell you as a operator and looking for a second location, it has been a horrific experience. Either they want to raise the price by $4 or $5 million, or they want to raise the rent by $10,000 or $20,000 a month. And you have all of the distance requirements. So again, in past litigation, it was not clear and it was not clarified. Therefore, many people took advantage of the door being open. I think if you close that, once again, that'll be better for all of us that are planning to participate. Now, to this issue, I looked at NRS 678B 200, and I know that you guys are trying to do, and I believe, all you can to create a level playing field and make this industry diverse. We have, from where we started, very few locals or Nevadans that are in the business or remain in the business, which I guess is their option. But I just say going forward, I appreciate if you keep, 200 and 250 in mind. Distance requirements, and I've written this and said this many times, has hurt, I think, the minority communities, because during segregation, there were churches, schools, and parks. And with the distance requirements, 300 feet from a community facility, 1,000 feet from a school, now 1,500 feet from a casino. The casino isn't as much as an issue, but when you look at the industry when it started in 14, 15, there were warehouses you could get for 15, 20 cents a square foot. Those areas now you pay $3, $4, $5, $10 a square foot. So that industry has benefited all over the valley. But we still see in the minority communities, Black and brown, those that were segregated, because of the distance requirements, we don't have any dispensaries in those communities. So I know it's probably something you can't deal with because a statute is a statute. And if you have the authority, then I'd ask you to look at it. If not, I do understand. But I do want to speak to a few of the items. And I guess, again, more questions. I thought there was limited licenses for consumption lounges. And so as I read, I'm not sure if we're talking about everything which I heard here. So I will rewrite my comments and submit them based on what I hear today. But so if we're talking limited licenses for consumption lounges, and as I understand, there's going to be 20 licenses, 10 social equity, and 10 independent. Okay, so a lot of what I was looking at made me think, oh, well, you submit an application, and I don't understand what this random number selector is. So that would be good if I could have a definition. But I guess my first comment, let's get to it. Says the board, this is number 2. I don't have a page number here, but the board will accept applications in response pursuant to this section for 10 days. So when an application goes out, is the application going to only be out for 10 days or is it going to be out for 30, 45 days? That was a question that I didn't see anywhere else. So I'd leave that to the table. And I think I appreciate you guys having these meetings, very important. But when the applications are all done, I think it would behoove all of us to have a pre-bid, pre-selection, pre-whatever we call it, so folks can ask questions so they don't have to walk away and depend on what somebody else tells them. The other thing I would suggest and ask you to do is when there is a point of contact, and it's said in here, and I appreciate that it must be in writing, that whatever website you're using, if it's your site, that there's one place that everybody submits a question, there's one place that everybody can read the answer. So no group or special people have information that other people don't. It talks about a seller here in 5.040. I was under the impression that you were not going to use a seller. But if you are, then I'm going to just drop down where it appears to me the responsibility for either people being able to get in, or if they're using Excella or your private system, that is vitally important that folks have access. In Los Angeles, a nightmare. And if everybody thinks we're on the same page and somebody just got a number and an email and a password and applications come out and they forgot it, they might end up like a lot of the people in California, Los Angeles. So I would say that whatever the system that's going to be used, try to get as much access for those that are going to apply as possible. The board would not be held responsible for any technical issues. I don't understand that. I think they should be, because we on our side are going to be responsible for submitting the application.
And honestly, that's mostly if everybody waits till the last minute to submit the application. Yeah, it's going to get jammed up. That's it.
Yeah, I agree.
Why that was put in there.
But if we had like 5 days to submit,
You're going to have 10 days.
yeah. Let me go to the next page. Top of that next page here, it talks about the board's website. And again, prior litigation talked about verbal conversations. I know that you guys aren't going to allow that, so I ain't going to beat that dead horse. I think the other thing that's vital is that the system that you utilize is able to track everyone that submits an application, everyone that applied or had a question. Because again, I'm just giving you from history. Prior litigation, people made comments, but there was no record. Or people asked questions and there was no record. Or folks say, I'm already in the system and there was no record. So it's important, I think, to make sure that for all of our sake that we have a system that is robust and can defend any challenges as it relates to information or accepting information. Okay, the random number selector, again, I'm not sure. So I think what I heard today is that we all fill out our application and submit it. And there's going to be random means it's almost like a lottery without saying lottery. Okay. All right. I got that. All right. No problem. So I came all the way here for that question.
The Attorney General has,
I did not hear the word lottery.
No, I didn't hear lottery. All right.
the legislature used it, but the Attorney General say we can't.
Okay. All right. So I retract my question asking to you to explain it. I got it. Okay. I like the control liquid assets in the amount of 200,000 that you delayed. I would just say, I personally, from my experience, and thank you again for extending our license because we had been looking for over a year and not able to find a location until recently. But if the applicant is a social equity applicant and hopefully they aren't under the dime or under the thumb of the investor because they need money to apply. They need a financial statement. So if that isn't the case, let's say they get selected and they are a winner and they're going through the process and now it's time to find an investor. It's easier financially to negotiate when you have a piece of paper than before, and I need the money to even apply. So I credit you for that and thank you for that. And I've already mentioned the distance requirements. Let me go to number 6 right quick. Physical address. And I think this is where I saw that talk about you just need a location rather than a I think it was already mentioned, but I do want to add on that if the applicant has to reply within 48 hours, then you guys should reply in 48 hours as well. Number 8, for consumption lounges only. I think I've gotten a clear picture of what we're talking about, all license types. Okay. 2A, number 10. On number 10, it talked about, let me get there. I can't read the
Diversity plan.
yeah. And then it said drop down to 10, but 2A 10 in parentheses I is where it is, right? Or it's under 1210. I think. I don't think it's under 2A10.
2A10. Nope, it's under 2A10I.
289?
2A10I. Yeah.
Okay.
2A10 Roman numeral I.
I won't take up any more time. Thank you very much. I'll submit my new comments in writing.
Thanks, appreciate it. Again, I actually want to point out, because it came up twice already, we may have to look at that again. The definitions we put in for board member and officer were exactly that reason, is because we think on the last application, some people were padding those to get the diversity points, and we're doing a different process. So we may need to actually relook at those definitions really quickly.
I would also like to just point out, and Frank, after your comments, and we appreciate, right, clarifying and the confirmation on the mechanics of the application process. However, these are still proposed draft regulations. And so once they're finalized, when they're adopted and then registered, we will have more opportunity to do either obviously it's not a workshop, it'll be a listening session. Anyway, an opportunity for the public to come and really ask questions on the final product, or for us to at least run through how the mechanics will work on the final product. So,
and I believe Ms. Goins is actually creating those type of workshops to actually help people fill out their applications. I do believe. I want to point out a couple of things because it was brought up twice. There is a definition for applicant. It's actually in the regs in number one. Excuse me, I don't have the actual number in front of me right now, but applicant is defined. What else did I? Again, for the application process, it will be on the Acela website. It's just going to have, again, we thought it was clear because we've done this 100 times now going through this, but go underneath the application, there's like 10 things you're just going to have to basically check off and fill out for the application and submit it in Acela. You have to submit one document, fill out names and addresses of all the owners, address if you have it, if not, location, specific jurisdiction. It's a very limited application process on this one. So you should just be able to fill out 10, 12 things, hit submit, and it's in. The random number selector, we're going to take all these applications, all the ones that are verified, they're going to all each get assigned a number, and those numbers are going to go into the random number selector, and it's just going to select random numbers at each, and those are the ones that are going to be moved forward to a prospective license. It's really that, hopefully it's really that simple. Is there anything else to build up? Yeah. You did-
Is it okay if I still say something?
Absolutely.
Okay, my name is Sophia Abdul Rahim for the record. I am a graduate of the social equity class. I was just concerned about the social equity class with the licensing. You were saying that it was going to be a random number, so selected for the licensing, and it's just very difficult to understand the selection. You know, we went through this class, through this course. We put our hard work in, so we just kind of wanted to have like a concrete, you know, like basically to know that maybe, I mean, we might not saying that our application would get chosen, but to at least get looked at, you know what I mean? It's like we put a lot of work in, so it's very difficult looking at an industry and seeing just one class of people in the industry and in the economy. So the social equity piece is very important. Also, we were kind of confused about the agent card. There's 2 cards. So do we need both or just the one? But like she said, we can't really get it without, you know, having a license for an establishment beforehand. So we don't have a dispensary, but we plan to have a consumption lounge. So, you know, that was a concern. Also, another concern that we wanted to bring up is like one of the regulations were saying like about the smoking. Like if we smoke, it has to be like in the concealed area. But like how concealed does it need to be? Like, you know what I mean? When you go into a bar, everybody's smoking, or the casino, there's smoke everywhere. So I guess it was just a little unclear about how concealed does our area for the smoking portion of the consumption lounge, you know, need to be. So
we will get to that. We're just not talking about the application regs. And there is no concealed. It's just that there has to be a separate smoking room, and the separate smoking room can
I
be
guess
90% of the facility if you want it to be. So
right. Okay, I guess
we will definitely be going over that.
But my main concern was the social equity piece. So maybe I'll just keep sitting, listening, and seeing if anything else pops up. But that's our main concern.
Thanks. And again, I'd like to point out, especially for the social equity, is the social application. Everybody who fills that out will have met all the social equity criteria. So everybody that actually fills that out will be put in a random number selector, and randomly 10 will be selected from however many qualify under our social equity criteria. It's the only fair way we can come up with doing it. Is there any other public comments here in Las Vegas?
I have a question. Oh,
Sorry.
you can wait.
I'm sorry. Real quick, mine's real quick. So just to clarify, Nicole Buffon, with M4MM in the chamber. So with the social equity, the people who apply for the social equity applications, they would have already been qualified. They will already have been filtered through and said that they do qualify before their application is allowed to be submitted. That's how it goes.
It'll come up, you fill it out. We are going to be checking under the process is when you fill out the application, you could be selected. However, they need to look forward under the suitability analysis. And the suitability analysis, you need to prove that you lived in one of these jurisdictions that qualify. And if we find out under the suitability analysis that you didn't live in one of those jurisdictions, that
Your
license
applications will be kicked out.
will likely be denied, and we will have to then have another drawing for however many applicants don't.
So you
meet the
can
conditional
actually,
status.
I'm sorry, just to clarify. So you can actually apply without having all the qualifications. It's once you get from the suitability to the next step of the application process, that's when you can be kicked out if you did not meet all the requirements.
Yeah, and then you'll be wasting however much money you put in for the
Right.
minimally $2,500 for the application process.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Before take you, we had
Oh, it's for
Board Member Durrett?
Deputy. Oh, thank you. For Deputy Miles, I had a question on, at some portion, I didn't mark down what section it was. It says that you could apply to the board if you're denied. What are you, or appeal? What are you appealing? Are you appealing a denial of the suitability finding? Or,
Correct. That's exactly it. They'll be given a chance to come in and make arguments of why their suitability should have been granted. So you're going to give basically a second look if they appeal.
oh, okay, because the board is the one finding suitability, but this would be like a preliminary review by staff?
No, the board will be deciding if they pass suitability analysis. If you choose to fail them, we're just giving them the option to come back and come back in front of the board and explain why they should have been granted. It should have been granted.
Okay, and then you just said that another drawing would be conducted, but that's not contemplated in the regulations, right? If
it would, let's say, and again, I can't imagine anybody filling out and paying the money to do this if they hadn't already checked that they qualify. But if they were to do this and they don't qualify, because we're going to go through the suitability analysis is going to be an extensive process. If they do this, let's say for some reason, 2 out of the 8 don't qualify. Sometime later, we would actually have another drawing for another 2 or more social equity licenses down the line.
because that's not in the regulations, so I think that should be added. I could be wrong.
Noted. Yeah. Well, I'm sorry. I'm just running through my head how to put that in there. But yes, we'll take a look at that.
Thanks.
Scott Rutledge for the record, our general partners on behalf of the chamber. To that point of what to do in case someone doesn't qualify through suitability, one suggestion would be to just have an additional list of folks who are kind of on standby, if that's possible. Nope, shaking your head no.
Again, I'm responding to this.
Because if somebody thinks that they've got something they're entitled to, even though they're a runner-up or something.
I probably shouldn't even be going to this, but if you have a runner-up selection, we pick like 11, 12, 13, 11, 12, and 13 are guaranteed to sue.
yes.
Guaranteed to sue.
I withdraw that comment. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Rachel, I just have a comment. I wanted to know, if I'm not mistaken, I thought I heard that there's an opportunity for 10 licenses for social equity diversity, 20 for consumption lounges and another 10 for another general. Is that correct?
No, it's 10 independent, 10 social equity, and then there's going to be the retail licenses that are unlimited.
Is there a reason that there's only 10 opportunities and more opportunities for people that are not from diverse? Is there a reason why there's only 10?
The short answer is that's how the legislature drew it up.
Thank you, sir.
Scott Rutledge again. For clarity purposes, as I understood, the cap is really based on how many retail stores apply. So if I heard 45 or so have indicated they would like to apply, and if they're going first, let's say, and you've processed those and turns out there's 40, then there would actually be 40 licenses on the other side, 20 of which would be considered independent and 20 of which would be considered social equity. Is that correct?
Not for the initial. The initial is, it is 20, but you are correct. We can have as many consumption lounges as there are retail consumption lounges.
Understood. So it's not an unlimited.
It will be half and half.
It'll be split evenly. So for every one over 20 on the retail side, the first one goes to social equity, the second one over 20. So there's 22 retail stores that are awarded a license for a lounge. Then there would be 22 on the other side, and 11 of those would go to social equity, and 11 of those would be independent.
Not initially. Initially, it's going to be the 10 and 10. That's what we were mandated. It's going to be 10 and 10. However, if there is going to be more, beginning of next year, we can have another application round and license a few more independents and a few more social equities.
Understood.
As long as it's even.
If you understand, you're one of the few. I've read it a number of times. The legislature on the math created a nightmare because they put limitations in terms of you must have so many equity to so many retail, and it varies. So as you said, it can increase, but it can be limited depending on how the numbers work as they outlined in the bill that was put forth.
So understood. So again, just for clarity, in this first round of licenses for independent and social equity, there will only be 10 and 10, regardless of how many retail stores apply, because is it based on how many of those actually get open as lounges? Because working during the legislative process, it was my understanding we were trying to create parity between retail stores and independents, and that half of all independents would be social equity. So if 45 retail stores were to apply and go through the process of, this perspective or whatever we're going to call it, and then receive permission to go forward with, call it a, provisional, and that happens prior to a licensing round for independent and social equity, wouldn't it then be possible to go ahead and allow for more than 20 based on the number of retail stores that apply?
I don't think so. Again, I have to look at it again. I don't think so on the initial round. If there is more, we can and likely will, depending on the board, because the board's the final arbiter of it, open another round next year, beginning of next year probably, where we would license a few more independents and a few more social equities, again, with parity of the retail consumption lounges.
Okay, thank you very much.
There any other comments on the application regs in Las Vegas? How about in Carson City?
Not at this time.
All right. We'll move on. All right, and the second half of the regs, this is again primarily the operational side of things. The initial ones was just the application process. This is going to be the operational side. I will start off again. I'm likely going to go through a couple at a time for the first. I'm going to put 1, 4, and 5 together because there was limited changes on 1, 4, and 5. Start off in Reg 1 under the consumption lounge regs. NCCR 1.22 added inhalable extracts and topicals as to its definition, to the single use definition. In Regulation 4, we updated the disciplinary regs based on suggestions made during the last workshop. That regarded changing intoxication to overconsumption. So we did that. And also in Reg 5, 5.100, again, those were literally just housekeeping regs. We added, adult use cannabis sales facility. They're just housekeeping regs. Does anybody have any comments on Las Vegas, obviously on regs 1, 4, or 5?
Chris Anderson with Solid Consulting, representing Planet 13 Holdings and Hardeen. On the section regarding inhalables, if we could add a the allowance for the smallest amount of vaporizer cartridges that exist on the marketplace, which I believe is 0.3 grams. That would be helpful to improve the air quality of consumption spaces, and just to allow one of the most popular products to be consumed in consumption lounges.
Again, I wanted to ask about this. Did you read in there there's a limitation that they can't do that? I mean,
Well, 50 milligrams of THC,
the
it's
maximum.
so yeah, and the smallest, even the smallest vape cartridges, I did some back of the napkin math, and they do contain, triple digits at least. Now, again, that's where I think training comes into play, where, maybe we especially look out for overconsumption with, consumers that choose to vaporize. But, the nice thing about, well, one feature of inhalable products is that they're not like edibles where you eat, you consume it, and maybe you feel the effects 2 hours or more afterwards. Inhalables, you tend to kind of know as you go. If you're smoking a joint or a bong or a vaporizer, that intoxicant is going to, take effect almost instantly, which I think is helpful for preventing overconsumption.
Any other comments on regs 1, 4, and 5?
Good afternoon, Amanda Connor on behalf of Connor and Connor PLLC. I sat in the back, so I got my exercise since I was up all night. On Reg 4.050, subsection 1A2, I realize that this is not new language, but I would note that other intoxicants, depending on how it's defined, according to several legal authorities, intoxicants can include tobacco and caffeine, would mean that at consumption lounges, we couldn't have caffeinated products. And the employees couldn't take a smoking break to smoke a cigarette in the parking lot. I realize that reg is already in effect for certain or for all cannabis establishments. I just think we need to be, I just wanted to bring that out.
We're obviously not going to punish anybody for drinking a soda on watch or smoking a cigarette out back.
I appreciate that because I definitely need my caffeine. For proposed reg or number 30, it's about overconsumption. I would ask how that's going to be defined. I looked it up, and according to various medical sources, there's different signs of overconsumption. So is it left to each establishment to determine what signs of overconsumption they're training their agents on, and that if those are displayed, or is it something that the board or staff may give more guidance on? And lastly, with regards to 4.060, number 9, regarding designated hours, I note that later in the proposed regulations, it talks about that the designated hours have to be in your application. I would ask that there be proposed regulations or a process for changing those, because as we have seen with other cannabis establishments, often local jurisdictions change what their permissible hours of operations are. I do not think it's smart to only limit it to what you originally designated in your application. With regards to the water service, I noted that it said it must be provided in later section to all consumers. What if there is a patron there that is not consuming? Does it have to be a water service? And is there any limitation on how much water must be provided? Those are my comments for those particular sections. Thank you.
Hi there.
Sean Luce with New Leaf. I'd just like to echo the comments that Chris brought up about the serving size, the 50 milligrams as it relates to vapor products. I do think he's right on target that really the smallest vapor product on the market currently is a third of a gram vaporizer, and oil is usually about 85 to 90% THC. So that size, you're going to have about a 250, 270 milligram container. And I think to try to cut that back substantially just functionally won't work to vaporize, because you have to have at least a minimum quantity of oil to actually get in there and to get to the heating element and really function. So to try to cut it back to 50 milligrams, we'd be talking about, 5/100ths or 5/10ths of a what would that be, 0.05 of a gram, which is just a speck that is really an unmanageable quantity there. So
Thanks,
appreciate that.
Chief Cronkite.
Hi, again, Nicole Bafong, and for MM in the chamber. So inhalable extracted cannabis products, just like was before mentioned, I'm concerned about the milligrams, the THC milligrams dosage that is allowed. When we're talking about concentrates, vaporizing concentrates, like they said, the concentration of THC in those products is in the double digits. And so limiting to 50 milligrams is going to be quite difficult and almost impossible in order to serve someone that amount of THC. There's no way to scoop out a dab at 50 milligrams to know that that's how many milligrams is in it. And so that's quite difficult. And like they also said, it's different from an edible or digestible product because that could take up to 2 hours. And when you're vaporizing concentrates, it's instinct. It's instant. So you know right away what your level of intoxication is, and it's easier to measure. And then my other concern with the topicals, topical products absorb into the muscle. They do not break the blood barrier brain into your cells. And so intoxication is different when we're talking about a topical. It's not the same thing. You don't feel the effects of THC as a psychoactive effect as you do as a pain reliever or a muscle relaxer. And so that's just a little bit different when we're talking about intoxication levels for topicals. So I just wanted to add that comment.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Brianna Padilla. I'm the secretary with the Chamber of Cannabis. I've also worked as a cannabis educator and consumer advocate. So I just thought it might help the board to know when you're consuming an inhalable, you hit your peak at about 15 minutes immediately after consumption. So that's a much higher dosing time and the ability to sense how you are feeling. And when you are trying to limit the inhalables to below 250 milligrams, you're also putting an onerous responsibility on the industry in terms of man hours for dosing and sustainability for packaging as well.
Scott Rutledge on behalf of the Chamber of Cannabis. One possible solution for the inhalable extracted cannabis limit could be 0.5 gram. That's a pretty common, I think, size that's available or amount that's sold in the industry today for extracts. It could be less than that, but maybe not to exceed 0.5 gram. And then the other thing, we did submit written comments, but I wanted to put it on the record today about the discussion around group sales and allowing for a different amount of product, a maximum amount being allowed for 2 or more. And we suggested an 1/8. One, because an 1/8 is a very common package size in the industry. And so if you had a couple of people going into a bar to say order a pitcher of beer, you wouldn't sell a pitcher of beer to one person with a glass. I mean, I guess some places do, but that's not considered sort of the standard. And so we're sort of trying to contemplate that same experience for a group setting where 2 people come in and if they're going to be there for a couple hours. And certainly all this will go back to education and training, right? And understanding your customer. Some people can consume more cannabis than others. And again, if we're focused on public safety and we're talking about people not driving to these venues in some cases, maybe a tourist or whomever, but long story short, if we could increase that to, or create a definition for a group sale of 2 or more and limit that to an eighth, I think that would help us out with some of the business plans. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Rutledge. And again, I want to discuss that point again briefly. I talked about this at our last workshop. We're coming at this at the point where we want the individuals talking to the salespeople there at the consumption lounges. We really don't want one person coming up and buying for the entire group and then going back to the table. We really want the individual to be talking to those salespeople. Again, so they get an idea of what they can handle, what they can do, what products they should purchase. And we've been wrestling with how to deal with that. And again, I guess we limited it to what was our limit? The individual sales, sorry, I'm going. It's a gram, yeah, that's right. We limited to a gram for an individual, and then, but you're saying you should allow 2 people to come up and buy 3.5 grams. So understand that that's where we're coming. We're coming at a real serious balancing act here, and maybe down the line we can accept the analogy of everybody can just buy a pitcher forever at the lounges. But for right now, we're expecting that there's probably going to be a lot of people that might even be their first time ever going into this type of trying this type of product or entering this type of facility. So we really want the trained salespeople to be talking to everybody individually.
Again, Scott Rutledge for the record. And I think to that point, we're trying to balance this between the non-endemic consumer who, quite frankly, probably shouldn't be smoking more than a third of flower, of something to that effect initially. And there's also a discussion later about, a requirement for offering low THC products, like especially like a 2 milligram or 2.5 milligram beverage, something to that effect. But I do think there are a lot of consumers that for 2 people to sit down and consume an eighth together over the course of an hour or hour and a half, not necessarily my friends, but maybe some of my clients, that's what they do. And I think to require them to have to purchase it at a gram at a time, and this idea of them going up to a counter versus say a server coming to the table, we also haven't, we're not requiring reservations, but I think there's a lot of potential for gathering information about your customers before they come in. Obviously, this comes down to strong training and education and having your employees do things the way they should be done. But at the same time, I know balancing that with public safety is probably the big question here. But again, I'd go back to, I think an eighth is such a common amount that is purchased. Now, whether someone's buying that to consume over a couple of weeks or in one evening at home, that's a good question. But it was just something that in speaking with some of the members of the chamber, I think they would like to see a group sale component if possible.
We did include in the regs, I believe that we did include that you can, again, last time we were trying to keep it to single transactions, but this one, again, we're making single transactions, but you can actually combine multiple single transactions into one final sale. So you don't have to do buy,
Keep a tab.
Yeah, exactly.
Frank.
Wise.
I was going to get the car. I just like to say, as an owner operator, it's the cleanup that I would be concerned about. If they're from outside the state and they're not a smoker and they buy an eighth and they leave it there, I got to clean it up, and that's a process all within itself.
True. Got to be a little quicker, Mr. Anderson.
I'm moving as fast as I can at this point. Chris Anderson, on behalf of Planet 13 Holdings and Hardeen, just kind of bolstering what Mr. Rutledge spoke to. I think, on the whole, like with the 1 gram that you changed the individual sale to, they're extremely helpful because that's a product that's available and produced, and it's out there in the market. When you're talking about vaporizing, 0.3 or half gram, those are the things that are, available and on the market. When we're talking about flower, and again, to this group purchasing concept, there are, blunt products out there that are a premium product that would be very attractive for lounges to be able to sell, not the one person, but the 2, 3 people after a consultation about their experience level. And those, around 2.75 grams. And then if you were going to do any kind of concierge, kind of maybe joint rolling experience, something like that, flower comes in packaging of 3.5 grams. So I think that's why people are kind of gravitating toward that. We're just trying to come up with something that's there in the marketplace where we don't have to come up with some brand new product just so that we can, make it work in a lounge. Just to kind of clarify that.
Thanks.
Hello again, Nicole Buffong, and for MM in the chamber. In regards to the intoxicants, that there would be no other consumption of intoxicants on the premises. Like she mentioned, caffeine and tobacco are considered intoxicants. But tobacco is a common wrap for flower. And so I just want to clarify, are you saying you're not allowed to use tobacco wraps inside of the consumption lounges at all? Is that?
Not allowed using tobacco.
So the wraps that you wrap the flower in sometimes can be tobacco.
It's like cigars. Yeah.
Yes. And so is that allowed or not allowed? Because it's a very common wrap for especially people of color.
We actually didn't even consider it, so we'll have to.
Okay. All right. It's just a common use for how people consume flower. And so I just want to try to clarify that so people understand what they're allowed to do and what not allowed to do. And then the other question I had was about the training that you mentioned. Somebody mentioned about training the staff. Have you all decided, I apologize, I've not read all the way through the regulations yet. Have you all decided who is going to be in charge of that training, how that's going to work?
The individual establishments are going to be in charge of
okay. So you will allow private companies to come in and do the private training for those establishments. Correct. Okay. Thank you.
No problem.
Hi, my name is Amber Jansen, and I'm an advocate. I was going to address this a little bit later, but it ties into what you guys are talking right now about the lounges and using a gram of flour versus an eighth of flour. Well, there's very few production or cultivation facilities that package in gram sizes, so they're going to have to make special packaging. But when you get over to your 6.080 under inventory control, you state that all consumption lounges have to purchase from a cannabis sales facility. So you're telling everybody they can't buy wholesale. And if you're going to require 1 gram packages, but cultivation doesn't create them, now you're going to make them create them and then sell them to the dispensary. And then this dispensary upsells them to the lounges. When it's a lounge with a dispensary, it makes sense. But for independent, it doesn't make sense. A restaurant doesn't go to Smith's to buy their groceries. They use a wholesaler. So why can't an independent lounge use a wholesaler? But I just wanted to bring that up because it all kind of ties together on the packaging and sizes.
See your local legislature.
Because
they did that.
Amanda Connor from Connor and Connor, just in the talking about product limitation sizes and using stuff that is already produced or packaged at cultivations, I thought it would be important to point out that the proposed definitions in 1.197 and 1.222 all contemplate that these items would be specifically approved by the board for consumption lounges. And so everything, even if current cultivators or producers produce it, you would still have to submit and get separate approval for consumption lounges.
Thanks, Ish.
Hi, Karina Robinson here. I've been in the industry from medical, and so I'd like to just talk about the packaging and the quantities that we're doing. If we can stay as consistent as possible with what is currently approved in our cultivations and productions, that'd be much easier for us. Also, when it comes to our labeling and our package changes, we have gone through multiple since 2020, even back in 2018. Today is 2022, and we are talking about more. I'd like to just remind everybody that there are human beings that are trying to put this together. And if we have a separate approval system for the products that are going into a consumption lounge that have to that have to go through the retail establishment, this is an extra layered system that I understand if it needs to be there. But I'd like to remind everybody that we can keep it as consistent as possible of what we already have going on. And if we can have the option to wholesale would have been great through the legislature, obviously, for all of us. So if we could ever look at that again, that'd be a great option for us. And I'd just like to say hello and thank you to everybody.
Thank you.
Oh, may I ask one more thing? When we are looking at the approvals and denials for all of our packaging, we are also being charged for time and labor management. When there's misunderstandings and or clarifications that are needed, our operators were being charged, for all of that. So when it comes to what we're all responsible for, I'd just like some time or some consideration with our time and management fees that are going out when there is misunderstandings with our packaging requests and our labeling requests that are going through. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Scott Rutledge again for the record, representing the Chamber of Cannabis. I was consulting with some of my colleagues, and we think this may show up later in one of the other regs, but this would allow for a lounge to purchase a bulk product from a retail store. For example, an ounce of flour and break it into 28-gram servings without having to individually package each gram. If that's what we're talking about here, that's fine, because otherwise we're talking about an inordinate amount of waste to serve a gram of flour or usable cannabis to a customer, especially if I understand in a retail store where there's a transaction occurs, they leave consume off site. This is a consumption that is occurring on site with trained professionals overseeing the process. I think we could get away from having to package every single 1 gram of usable flour sold to a consumer, especially if it's sold table side and brought out in some sort of presentation.
I think that's what we were considering. I mean, we know we specifically talked about it for edibles, so I think it was for all product that you're going to be able to.
That would be our hope, certainly. Thank you.
Amanda Connor and Connor PLLC, echoing off what Scott did. I looked through the draft regulations and did not find any proposed changes to the requirements for retail store sales when they sell. And there's limitations on what they can sell per package and labeling requirements, and it's not exempted out for consumption lounges. So if they were to arguably sell bulk flour to a consumption lounge right now, there is specific labeling requirements that isn't exempted out for sales directly to consumption lounges. So I think that would need to be addressed, and that's why I think some people are taking it as they would have to be separately packaged because of the packaging and labeling requirements that weren't changed in CCR 12, I think it is. Thank you.
Thanks. Any other comments in the Las Vegas office? Any comments in Carson City? I apologize if I didn't ask. Any comments or questions from the board? All right, we'll move on to Reg 6. There were several changes to Reg 6, so I'll take Reg 6 all by itself. In 6.075, we made some clarifying language change. Nothing major. 6.080, we clarified that as a statutory requirement that lounges must purchase inventory from a sales facility. Again, it's a statutory requirement. There's nothing we can do about it. 6.085, updated the requirements to have external hard drives on hand. And we initially had 30 days, and we see that's not feasible. So you have to have enough hard drives to have at least 7 days worth of data on a minimum of 7 cameras on hand at all times. It also specifies that security personnel must be monitoring the security camera footage in real time when a lounge is open for business to the public. Six 6.090. It says, adds language taken from the FDA Employment and Health Personal Hygiene Handbook. A worker needs to let their employer know if they have symptoms, which could be due to illnesses which are transmitted through food or cannabis. Again, this is in relation to the comments made last time about the employee illness log. The employee is diagnosed with specific illness. The licensee must report that to the CCB. It's very limited situations through an incident report, unless another form is developed by the CCB. The infected worker, again, must be excluded and restricted from working around open food or cannabis. And that's it for Reg 6. Does the board have any questions on, any board members have any questions on Reg 6 or comments? Does anybody here in Las Vegas have any questions or comments on Reg 6? Getting quicker there, Mr. Anderson.
Chris Anderson, Solid Consulting, on behalf of Planet 13 Holdings. Just a comment on 6.085, the provision requiring that we have a position dedicated to watching the security cameras. I know, at least one of my clients would, can only pay so many employees in these lounges. It's an unproven concept. And, one of my clients was pretty adamant that they think that they can meet the goals of, protecting public safety in their establishments by having that person out on the floor, watching for, anything that's outside of CCB regulations happening. So, I just urge the board, on the person, constantly viewing the security cameras, I'd ask just to give us some discretion on that point. I think it could potentially, again, staff time might potentially be better used providing security services, elsewhere.
Any other comments?
Hi. Chair, Director, hi, Jim Lewis. I'm licensing and land use counsel of the city of Las Vegas. I just want to make the point that the city of Las Vegas is in full support of the changes you've made with regard to the security measures. Thank you.
Thanks.
Amazing Hill. Thank you, esteemed board. I'm one of the CEIC cohorts, since I'm looking at you guys and y'all are there. I'm concerned about how the consumption lounge, as I would like to and will be a consumption lounge owner, I want it to have an elite experience. I don't want it to be reminiscent of a crack house. I'm an advocate, I'm a person in long-term recovery. I understand the whole process of what's happening, but it doesn't appear like that. It appears as if we're either going to sharecrop dealing with the dispensary, and then when you come into our facility, it's like right here, and I'm very new to this, okay? So if the board learns an increase in criminal activity or at or near location of a particular cannabis establishment, the board shall require the license to create an appropriate risk mitigation plan. I'm like, even in the alcohol establishment, does that same thing happen? Is it critiqued so much or scrutinized in that way? And are we looking at this and still in a Schedule 1 situation? I see it as a plant. It's a medicinal plant to me. CBD is what I'm from a medical space. So I'm looking at it from that perspective. Also, I was concerned with one more thing, if you don't mind, because I'm new. I'm a baby when it comes to this. Aisha taught me a lot, so I give her credit. I just, in addition to cannabis consumption lounge shall prohibit consumer from bringing in firearms. I mean, I think that would already be established, right? We don't do it in alcohol places. So I just don't want it to be seen as something of that crack house mentality. It's not supposed to look that way. It's a beautiful plant. Thank you.
Amanda Connor, Connor and Connor PLC. Pursuant to 6.070, I believe this actually should apply to subsections 1, 2, and 3. Right now, it or the way the regulations are written, emergency personnel are not permitted without signing in to a visitor log and receiving a visitor badge. I know the impracticality, we're probably not prohibiting emergency personnel into the facility, but I do think it would be a smart idea to specifically call out in the regulations here, because in the Section 4 violations, there is a violation for not admitting emergency personnel promptly.
Understand. And like before, I could absolutely guarantee we're not going to cite you for allowing an officer to come in and do his job.
I completely understand. I think it would just be smarter to have the regs cleaned up, since it is a violation in NCCR 4 for not allowing them in, to explicitly say they are permitted in. Under 6.075, 1B4, I believe that the word "or unused cannabis" is actually improperly used. In these regulations, it is specifically required that all cannabis is rendered unusable pursuant to section 10.0803, and therefore there should not be any disposing of unused cannabis without first rendering it unusable.
Is disposing would require you to go through that process.
That's
We're just
correct.
covering both types.
Because I would argue the way it's written, I could just here dispose of unused cannabis without rendering it unusable.
I think there's, well, in Chief Cronk, I think there's specific guidelines for disposing of any type of product, and it's held elsewhere. So
Correct.
if it's
There-
you would still have to go through the disposal process.
Right. I think it's just, I agree. I think in the past, in the medical regulations, I think Ms. Cronkite was there at the time, there was language that was conflicting for the retail stores. And so there became confusion. So I think it's cleaner to just say you have to dispose of cannabis rendered unusable, because that is the requirement. And elsewhere, it is completely covered that unusable cannabis must be rendered unusable before you dispose of it. So that's my suggestion, because otherwise it reads here that I could dispose of cannabis rendered unusable or unusable cannabis. Lastly, under 6.080, I believe it is, number 13, regarding if the board learns of an increase in criminal activity. It does not define what an increase is. So it could be a 0.5% of the criminal activity, of any type of criminal activity. And it says it shall require the licensee to create an appropriate risk mitigation plan. I would recommend that the word "shall" be changed to "may," so that the board has the discretion that if it is a very minor increase that may then go down, just based on the time of year or other factors, that the licensee is not required to do a risk mitigation plan. Thank you.
Aisha Goins for CEIC. And I just want to call attention also to, if I put my glasses on, I could probably see it. 6085, section 811. Is that right? No. Section 11. If an emergency requires law enforcement, firefighters, emergency medical services providers, board agents, or other public safety personnel to enter the premises of the business, the cannabis establishment is responsible for ensuring that all consumption stops until they completed their investigation services and have left the premises. I think it should be defined exactly what leaving the premises means, because I can foresee a situation where there would be an investigation and yellow tape would be there and so forth and so on, and they would just kind of prolong that. So I want to really have that defined. And also, I've said this before, I think that any emergency enforcement should also have to report to the board what they're doing on the premises, because these licensees are under the guidance of the Cannabis Compliance Board. And so I want there to be some checks and balances with that. I'm really concerned with my social equity applicants and this being, and them being targeted. So I'm trying to ensure that in the language, we're protecting them. Also, if the board learns of an increase in criminal activity, to Amanda Connor's point, I think criminal activity should be defined, because what I don't want is there being an accidental overconsumption miss, or for example, they do an accidental over purchase or something to that effect. I know that there is enforcements for that, and those enforcements should be followed, but I don't think that is criminal activity. And so I would like for things like that to be defined specific. So those are my only things.
Very much.
Nicole Buffong again, with the Chamber of Cannabis and M for MM. One of my concerns is making sure that consumption, especially when we're talking about, let's say, I'm sorry, when we're talking about getting rid of product, I think that Nevada could lead the way in what we do with that product that is unused. It could be donated to veteran projects in the city. It could be donated to medical patient services in the city, patients that can't afford their medication. And I think that that's something that we could consider instead of throwing it away or getting rid of it, products that go unused, that we could consider donating those products, that the facility could consider donating those products to a legitimized organization that hands out medicine to patients in need. Thank you.
Thanks.
My thing would be to the unused product. Like, okay, most smokers, if they smoke it and they don't smoke it all, they put it out and come back to it. So we can sell it to them, but they can't leave with the unused portion. That just seems a little like, go to a restaurant and you just leave your food you just bought. You can take a doggy bag out with your food. Okay, I understand to me it's not a controlled substance. So it would be, I mean, you know what I'm saying? So if you don't finish your eighth with your party, how come you can't wrap that up and take it home, put it in your pocket, I mean, you know what I'm saying? So to me, that might need to be relooked at too, because even with the oils, or you know what I'm saying, if it's an oil pen that they have, they should be able to put it in their pocket and just go home without using it outside. I mean, you get what I'm saying? Like, to me, that seems a little.
We hear what you're saying, but that's one of the things that we read what the legislature did and said it's stupid. I'll just be blunt, but they did it. So we can't undo it until they undo it.
Okay. Well, I just kind of want to let them know to undo it, because to me, that seems a little far.
But I will tell you, in some households, ain't no unused meat.
And we don't disagree at all. Even the Public Safety Committee actually recommended that we make that change. We just can't do it because it's statutorily required. Because they said it could cause you to overconsume because you're just going to try to finish it. So we understand. There's just it's law. Any other comments? Any comments in Carson City?
No comments in Carson City.
Right. These I'm going to lump Reg 7, 10, 11, and 13 all together. Is there just some minor changes to each? Yeah. Oh, sorry. Did I say 10, 11, and 12, 13? Sorry. Regulation 7, 7.055. It was added to allow sales facilities to transport product to a lounge, but it must be tracked through the seed to sale system. And again, there was no changes to 10 or 11, and only minor housekeeping changes to Reg 12. So is there any questions or comments from the board about Regulation 7 and 10 through 12? Yeah, I'm gonna add 13 in as well, sorry, because I skipped that one. 13.040 also includes language to allow a sales facility to transport product to a lounge. Right? Has to do the same as Reg 7. Was there any questions from the board on Reg 7, 10, 11, 12, or 13? Any comments in Las Vegas on Reg 7, 10, 11, 12, and 13?
Darby Johnson. I have a quick comment on Regulation 7. I'm in the process, me and a couple of partners, we were going to do a delivery business, and one of the things we first came across was that you need a dispensary as your sponsor or the requester for the license. So I'm not sure the reasoning behind that, but it kind of puts you at a disadvantage if you don't know any dispensary owners. You're kind of stuck there. And then the second part of that is it talks about the type of vehicle will not be disclosed until after you've started that process of licensing. I think that should be public up front before you go through the process. It may be a vehicle you can't afford, so you've spent money getting to that point. But my main point is I would like you guys to take a look at the dispensary requirement as being a sponsor. I don't really understand the point behind that. So
I'll say I don't just like to explain that. I don't think there's any requirement that you be sponsored. I think you have to be hired to deliver for a dispensary, and that's just for local delivery.
I apologize. I didn't bring the exact printout, but maybe I read it incorrectly, but I'm sure it said the dispensary needs to request a license for the third-party delivery service.
Oh,
that's
Chief Cronkite, good.
This is Kara Cronkite for the record. I think what you're talking about is the fact that the dispensary is the one delivering the product. And so they would have to work out whether they want a third-party delivery company. If they do use a third-party delivery company, then that would be approved through us. Is that what you're referring to?
possibly. It appears from the way I read it that you shouldn't even apply for a license unless you have a dispensary already kind of sponsoring you. Maybe I'm using the wrong word, but
And Chief Cronkite for the record, all these products do have to be purchased through a dispensary. However, that comes from the statute. And like they were saying previously, you'd have to speak to legislation to get that changed, unfortunately.
okay. Basically, it would be a platform like Grubhub or something like that. They would order from a dispensary, third party would deliver it. So,
yeah.
So that what?
It's not. It's not at all.
Well, no, I mean, I know it's a different product. I mean, come on, I know it's a different product, but the dispensary.
Independent. Yeah, I think we're going way off topic. Sorry.
Yeah, just if we're not entirely sure, if we're not on the same path here, do you want to come up after, or do you want to submit some
That'd be
clarification?
fine.
And Chief Cronkite is happy to talk to you after.
Okay, that'd be fine. Thank you.
Absolutely. Sorry about that.
Afternoon to the board. Paul Michael Burgess for the record. I am the majority owner of Lit Games Lounge. I am a tech founder, and what I'm speaking about kind of speaks to his question. My business is, I founded part of my business is ground robots and drone cannabis delivery. So we're looking to be a third party of delivery service through ground robots and drone delivery once the FAA has their decision on drones in that area. But right now it is legal for ground robots. Also putting together a public health and safety on routes with some members that are already a part of the Las Vegas Police Department. So my question to the seven delivery consumer services, could we start to look at automation of smart cities as far as delivery of cannabis products that have to do with the FAA laws and also the state laws? If we could look at that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other comments?
Good afternoon, Amanda Connor of Connor PLLC. I would like to comment on section 7.055 and in comparison with 13.040. I believe the intent of the changes is that the retail store could transport cannabis much like a cultivation can transport to a production facility. However, with the inclusion of subsection 6 in 7.055 and the use of the word delivering, it appears that the requirements for delivery that the retail store must follow when delivering cannabis to customers must also be followed when delivering cannabis to consumption lounges, which would include calling ahead, verifying the order, having a trip manifest, having signed, ID scanned, all of that. I don't believe that's the intent, but the language used and where it's placed, instead of saying exempting it out of delivery and saying it's only transport pursuant to 13.040 would be my recommendation. I think that then if it was exempted out and only defined under 13.040, it would follow the normal requirements of transporting product, much like a distributor does, or a cultivation facility transports to a production facility. With regards to 12.050, subsection 3A, that requires cannabis consumption lounges to place a warning saying this is a smoking lounge. Occupants will be exposed to secondhand smoke. My question is, what if it's a consumption lounge that's a restaurant and does not permit smoking? Which I know there are some businesses that propose those types of ideas. And I believe those are my only comments on those sections. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments in Las Vegas? Any comments in Carson City?
No comments in
All right,
Carson
we'll move
City.
on to the meat of the topic. Regulation 15. And I'm just going to briefly run through some of the changes to each one, and then we'll take comments regarding the whole Reg 15 afterwards. In 15.010, and these are literally just housekeeping updates, properly naming things. 15.015 included language to further stress that it is required to visually inspect IDs and also to change intoxication to overconsumption based on comments from last workshop. 15.020, there was no change. 15.025 adds a limit to inhalable and topical products. It also allows a lounge to process multiple orders as a single transaction. 15.030 adds a requirement of a COA for hemp products, and what must be included with the certificate. Also requires a low dose option to be available at the lounges. The rest is just clarifying language. 15.035, again, this is also just housekeeping, changing some names. 15.040 is also housekeeping and added that consumer illnesses only need to be logged when reported after consumption. 15.045, no change. 15.050 and changed it. Used to require employees wear PPE. Now it's just requiring the lounge to provide PPE. 15.055. It's added language from the comments by one of the local jurisdictions regarding odor mitigation plans for indoor and outdoor smoking areas. 15.060, again, added nicotine as clarifying language. And 15.065 added alcohol as clarifying language. 15.070 added food to the reporting of medical incidents if ingesting the food necessitated medical treatment. 15.075, this update permitted to allow again, based on comments at the last workshop, includes that unused cannabis must be destroyed pursuant to 10.080 subsection 3. 15.080, again, as you can see, this is just housekeeping language. 15.085, there was no change. 15.090, update to the visibility of consumption. The first main requirement must not be visible from a public place, and either you must have a sight obscuring wall, or the lounge must be at a height that obscures people from being able to look into it and see the consumption taking place. 15, and again, that was mostly because if you have a balcony or a rooftop lounge, you don't want you to have to block the view as long as nobody can look down into your lounge. 15.095, no change. 15.100, added permanently attached and included a definition of permanently attached. 15.105, no change. 15.110, this is added a whole new reg that included, that talked about any surface or utensil that has direct contact with cannabis or food must be washed, rinsed, and sanitized in an approved manner. This language is consistent with the existing requirements for cannabis production facilities outlined in NCCR 9.055. And 15.115 is a new reg notifying that lounges will have to comply with the requirements of local public health regulatory agencies. And that's it for Reg 15. Does any of the board members have any questions or comments on Regulation 15? All right. Anybody here in the Las Vegas office have any comments on Regulation 15? Surprise, surprise.
Chris Anderson, on behalf of Planet 13 Holdings and Hardeen. Couple of sections. 15.055, I submitted written comments on this section regarding outdoor spaces. But I'd like to find some kind of common ground so that we can really encourage outdoor spaces. The CAC Subcommittee on Public Health, really demonstrated that outdoor spaces are much safer for employees and consumers from a secondhand smoke perspective, and that really with outdoor spaces, odor is the main concern, not really a health concern. So I think taking an outdoor space and then mandating that it be enclosed kind of takes away some of that benefit. And that's maybe something that is better for local jurisdictions to decide, for zoning purposes, whether odor is or is not an issue for any specific location. On section 15.085, I submitted this and made in-person comments at the workshop in December, but I really do think that the board should retain its ultimate authority to shut down a licensee, for an emergency that doesn't rise to the level of a general emergency. Even if it's just, a phone call or something like that, verifying, from a law enforcement agency, verifying with the board that, they have permission to move forward with the closure. I do think it's something that's serious enough that the board ought to retain that authority. That should be my last comment for this workshop. So I'm going to take this opportunity to thank you very much for all the work that went into this.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson.
Nicole Bafong, again, for the record, and for MM in the Chamber of Cannabis. I just want to reiterate the topical cannabis products containing no more than 100 milligrams of THC. If somebody's getting a massage and the container that they're using has 100 milligrams of THC in it altogether, and they scoop out a portion of it to give for the massage, if more is needed, That's where I mean by the 100 milligrams when you're dealing with topicals, it doesn't make a lot of sense. And just using the products to be able to give the person relief is what makes sense. And each person might be different based on what their consumption of cannabis or THC is on a regular basis. And so their tolerance level for getting a topical might be different as well.
I would like to point out on these, this is just the single serving limit. There's nothing in here that prevents you from purchasing multiple servings.
Oh, okay. Okay. Got it. Okay. Just want to make sure. Okay. Thank you for that. And then when it comes to hemp and hemp derived products, 2 milligrams of THC, no more than 2 milligrams of THC and cannabis product of 0.4 grams of usable cannabis. So are you saying that the hemp, that the CBD portion can't have more than 2 milligrams of CBD, or are you saying THC? Is that it's supposed to be THC? This is in,
Which section? Yeah.
yeah, so,
Search products on
so
CBD.
this is 15.030 relative to cannabis, CBD, and cannabis-related products. It says hemp and hemp-derived products must be accompanied by a laboratory certificate of analysis. Such products must be labeled with the amount of THC. And so,
And this was, if you look at the one, which is under, it actually talks about cannabis, CBD, and cannabis-related products. So it does talk about it's cannabis products as well.
okay, okay, so,
The only THC products right now are the Delta 8 products, which might have what is now considered THC in it. But yes, it was cannabis, CBD, and cannabis-related products. So that is for the cannabis-related or cannabis products.
oh, okay, okay. All right, just want to make sure, just want to clarify. And then it says, of course, here, no consumption of alcohol, tobacco, and or nicotine products. I'm sorry, this is in 15.060. And or nicotine products. So it's states that again. So I just want to make sure that that's clarified for those consumption lounges. When the people come in, a lot of people like blunts or some type of tobacco wrap for their products. And so I just want to make sure that it's clear what they can and cannot use.
So I like cigars. I should have thought of that.
Yeah.
Did not. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
And Chief Cronkite, for the record, I just want to clarify that CBD products and hemp-derived products, we do require that laboratory certificate of analysis shows the THC percentage, just so that we can verify that it's below that 0.3% federal threshold.
I just wanted to make a Brianna Padilla with the Chamber of Cannabis. I just want to make a quick comment in terms of the visibility language in this, and also speaking to Amanda Connor's earlier point, the modality of cannabis consumption does matter. So let's say if you're in a restaurant environment, maybe you have a CBD infused wine or a cannabis infused meal, the visibility component of that would be very different. So I just encourage flexibility when you're thinking of these cannabis models. If somebody wants a nice restaurant vibe and they want to allow for visit windows, it's not the same thing as maybe a bunch of people lighting up a joint around in front of a window, which is, I think, what the intent was there.
Thank you.
Hello, Stacy Dugan. I'm a vegan chef. I'm also representing the Chamber of Cannabis. I wanted to speak to section 15.075 about all unused cannabis and cannabis products must be destroyed. I want to encourage you, just like Mr. Fung said earlier, to find another way to use the product that's left over. I've been in the food space for a while, and I know it's not the same as like throwing away food. I know like at the end of food service, we have to throw away because of temperatures and things like that, but cannabis and flower is a little different. You can keep the cannabis as long as it's within the expiration date. And I also want to give a testimony to having access to all the unused cannabis, because in 2020, when COVID hit, I had to shut down. While I was in the process of shutting down my restaurant, and in the process of doing that, I also created the cannabis brand that is now going to be distributed in dispensaries. But it was only because I had access to unused cannabis to practice with. So even finding some way so that minorities or people who want to get into the cannabis space, specifically in the food area, will have access to cannabis to practice with. I want to make or suggest that you all consider that, because that helped me tremendously. Thank you.
And Chief Cronkite, for the record, again, I just want to clarify the intention of that was items that have been served to customers and then not finished. So I'll clarify that in the regulations.
Aisha Goins with CEIC. I want to just first give some clarity on the, just because I was hearing the conversation and I don't want the gentleman to feel like he was miscommunicating. In the state of Nevada, all of our drivers, that is a license on its own. And so any other licensing would have to actually pair up with the current licensees. So I just wanted to kind of give conversation to that. And then 15085, law enforcement temporary closure of licensing operations. The board or the head of the local law enforcement agency will, with jurisdiction over the licensee or authorized designee in an emergency for cause or upon code violation of a specific act which endangers the public welfare and finding that such closure is necessary for the immediate preservation of the public peace, health, safety, morals, good order, or public welfare, make temporary close any cannabis consumption lounge for a period not to exceed 72 consecutive hours. I just want to reiterate the importance of keeping the jurisdiction of these lounges under the Cannabis Compliance Board. And if this is the case, I would like for the Cannabis Compliance Board to have an officer who is a state official to show up on site when this has to happen, so that that licensee is able to, in that moment, dialogue with the officer or the emergency person and the Cannabis Compliance Board, so that they feel like they have an opportunity to give some account for what's happening in the moment, not secondhand. Again, the jurisdiction relies here. We want to keep that. I definitely don't, I'm concerned about my social equity licenses, and I'm trying to foresee what may happen. And so I would prefer if in that moment, cannabis compliance staff was there when that has to close. That's all.
Scott Rutledge again, on behalf of the Chamber of Cannabis. I'd like to echo those remarks by Ms. Goins, and let you know that in surveying our members, this is a big issue as well, to allow law enforcement that kind of scope. We think that we understand the enforcement agency for the industry. You're still hiring folks, you're still building up, and that, you know, in some cases you do need to partner with law enforcement for certain actions. But I do fear there could be some targeting. In addition, I wanted to also echo Mr. Anderson's remarks about the outdoor consumption area. If we make it so complicated and expensive to allow people to allow their customers to consume combustibles outdoors, when we're already requiring, and we did this intentionally for the indoor, you're going to get to the point where we're going to price people out just completely. If you have an area that's enclosed indoor atrium or rooftop, yeah, odor is an issue. We'll fight that fight at the local level with jurisdictions and discuss what areas. If you've got a standalone property, for example, with a rooftop or a patio, and they're literally, you know, not next to any other businesses, requiring them to meet these type of requirements in these regs, when perhaps a local jurisdiction would say, you know what, we're okay if it becomes a problem in the future, then we can address that. So just having that flexibility around the outdoor consumption, which again was section 15.055, section 5 and 6. So I just think it's we want to make sure folks can afford to open these businesses. Thank you.
Sean Luce with New Leaf. I'd like to speak on section 15.055, the ventilation of lounges. While I certainly agree that robust ventilation and odor control is going to be very important for these facilities, I'm worried that the stated standards of 30 complete air changes per hour and 20 per hour outside of the smoking section is really going to be a cost prohibitive and a very difficult thing to engineer. To exchange every single bit of air every 2 minutes. And if you're pulling fresh air in on a summer day when it's 110 degrees and then trying to still maintain a cool temperature in there, I'm worried about just how that'll be done. And I think a lot of other facilities, you know, or in the single digits for the kind of air exchange that they have. And this is of course a special use, but to go all the way up to 30 and say exchanging every year, every 2 minutes, I'm worried about what that's gonna, take and the burden that that's gonna create. And if that level of ventilation is really necessary to achieve what we're trying to achieve, which is public health and safety, I imagine.
Hey, Sean, can I ask, and so, we took a lot of these recommendations right from the subcommittee on public health. So, if this is where we're at with the information that we've been given, I mean, if you have another suggestion with some backup materials, that would be very helpful for us, because while I certainly understand that and I understand the risk of being priced out, where do we go from there? Because this is, this was the level we were given, and so this is our starting point. If that makes sense. I mean, if you could just provide some of that, would be very helpful.
It does, yeah. I've been trying to do some research on this myself, understand other standards, and really look at systems and what the solutions would be like. So I'd be happy to follow up with some more information. And did you know, did this 30 and 20, is that mirroring any other regulated industry here in the state, or do you know where those?
It's standards from like cigar lounges,
Gotcha.
which I thought was pretty.
Yeah, similar.
Yeah.
Similar. Okay, thank you. Appreciate that.
Thanks.
Hi, Jim Lewis again, licensing and land use council of the city of Las Vegas. Just wanted to say thank you very much for your time spent on Regulation 15. We appreciate the changes made. We're fully supportive of those. I do want to take a chance to thank you for your time and effort. I want to point out to Ms. Balducci, Ms. Cronkite, they've heard a lot from us, and we've taken a lot of their time, and thank you for that as well.
Thank you very much.
Michael Burgess for the record. Speaking to Consumption Lounge, just have some information and question around it. First thing is, does to get into the lottery, is that a charge? Is there a charge to get into the lottery?
Yeah, that was in the earlier application section. There's
the 20
the application fee. It's social equity. It's either 2,500 or 5,000, and just a normal independent, it's 10,000.
Okay. To that, I haven't heard anything about BYOC, which is bring your own cannabis. One of the things about consumption lounges that would to sell cannabis, the storing legislation and the guidelines and the HVAC is expensive. You're talking over $1 million.
Easy.
To get into this business. BYOC, which other cities have under social equity laws, would allow somebody to open a yoga business or have an establishment. I own an esports lounge, video game lounge, tech business. My investors do not want me to sell cannabis because that money can't be put into federal regulation banks. So I'm all about the tech around cannabis, but I think BYOC, that being looked at, would help a lot of the consumption lounge people who just want to open a consumption lounge to make it a little bit less pricier than what it's going to be. Also, presidential executive orders that was signed on July 9th, 2021, executive order on promoting competition in the American economy. Also executive order signed on December 2nd, 2021. Biden-Harris administration announces reforms to increase equity and level the playing field for underserved small business owners. These executive orders speak exactly to social equity laws and also speaks to governing bodies and states to look at the benefits of boosting the economy, boosting small businesses, bringing people into the cannabis industry, funding small businesses. It speaks to looking at the good more than the bad. And why I say that is because a lot of Black and brown people are going to have a situation with NRS 678B.050, which it's excluded felony offenses. The only problem with this, I see that's in there, it doesn't exclude pedophiles or people who have white collar crimes against that. They could get out the same day and apply. It would be on the board of moral standings whether they denied them or not. So the social equity of the executive order, the presidential executive orders, looks to the governing board to look at every situation in social equity and how it benefits the economy, that state, and small businesses and startups in that state. Thank you.
Thank you.
Apologies, I don't think I stated my name for the record last time, but I am Rachel Lee. I just had a question on how would it look for cannabis edible manufacturing? Um, Because it was a milligram put per serving, 10 milligram. What if there's, say for instance, a wedding party that wanted to have a wedding cake edible? How are we um, getting 10 milligrams for the cake if a person wanted a wedding cake that's cannabis infused? Would that have to be individually wrapped and put together for a wedding cake, or looking outside of just gummies and, you know?
Yeah, I don't think there's anything set up for a full-size wedding cake to be delivered somewhere else to be used. I don't think there's any regulation for that anywhere.
Right, so, but
Unless
if,
I'm wrong, Ms. Cronkite, or Chief
if it
Cronkite.
was put into like 10 milligrams, right, for the cake, but individual
Would have to be
size,
individual slices, yeah.
sliced? Yes, sir. Okay, thank you.
Good afternoon, Amanda Connor of Connor P LLC. Some of my comments I had referenced previously, but for instance, in 5.010, talking about the designation of hours, I'd recommend that there be ability to change those hours after the application had been submitted. And in 5.015, with regards to signs of overconsumption, I think it would be helpful if guidance or definition was given to that. Under section 5.020, it requires that the person produce a valid form of identification. However, the corresponding regulation for retail stores requires that they be scanned by a department or a cannabis compliance board approved scanner to be verified. There's no such requirement for scanning and verifying the ID for the consumption lounges that I could find. I would recommend that it be the same requirements for stores and lounges, and either it's simply be produced or it be scanned and verified for both. With regards to 15.025, subsection 1, A, B, C, and D refer to usable cannabis, edible cannabis, inhalable extracted cannabis, and topical cannabis. Subsection E talks about a combination of those, but then uses different terms: usable, edible, and concentrated cannabis. I think this is an oversight from the change in subsection B that was made, but subsection E should be correspondingly amended to address those changes in the topics or the names of the products used. For subsection 5.030, subsection 7, it says you shall not knowingly recommend products to a person who is pregnant or breastfeeding. My question would be, as we all know and have learned as we grow up, you don't assume a woman is pregnant. You don't ask her how far along she is. That is rather rude. So is the knowingly standard meaning that the woman tells you, I am pregnant, and then you only know? I think I get the intent behind this and the feel good of it. But for instance, right now, the Alabama legislature is being torn apart because they're requiring in their proposed language a negative pregnancy test be presented for being able to be in their cannabis establishment facilities. I know the intent here is good, but I think the implications of how it could be carried out is very problematic.
Chief Cronkite for the record, and just to clarify, you are correct. It would be the pregnant person disclosing that they are pregnant.
So if you look rather pregnant, but you're just ate a big burrito, and you don't say you're pregnant, they could consume. Okay.
And I would,
doesn't even say you can't consume. It just says we can't recommend products to you if we know that you're pregnant. It doesn't say anything about you can consume or not consume.
However, to argue that the intent, as discussed earlier, was that every person who is consuming, that they first consult with a person to sell them, so you understand their limitations, what they should use. So I don't know if you can't recommend to them, but you are aware that they're a first-time user and they look pregnant. As long as they don't say they're pregnant, I guess you're fine to recommend. Okay.
For the exact reason you mentioned.
I think everyone should save a copy of this video, so moving forward in case there's questions about that. As attached 15.095 water service, I think we should define if someone's in there visiting that with like a spouse or friends and they are not consuming that water service, and how much water, if it is required, should be provided. And lastly, under 15.100, licenses attached to sales facilities, subsection 1, it specifically says that the licensee has no right to transfer said lounge license. I don't think that was the intent. I think the intent was that they couldn't sell it unless they also sell the retail store license. But what if a company is being acquired and they have a consumption lounge license? Are you saying that they can buy the dispensary, the cultivation, the production, but there is no right to transfer the lounge? That doesn't seem like that was the intent of the legislature. I think the intent should be, or the intent of this was that it's no right to transfer the lounge license without also transferring the retail store. Those are my only comments. I believe I am done for today. I appreciate everyone's hard work, time, and effort, and I will work to get written comments submitted.
I was gonna say, Ms. Scott, we really appreciate it. You just had a lot of comments, so please.
I will work as quickly as I can to get something submitted.
Thank you, appreciate it. Any other comments in Las Vegas? Any comments in Carson City?
No comments.
Okay, great.
in
And
Carson City.
before we end up, I want to personally thank everybody here for participating in this. This is absolutely important in us putting these regulations together, and we absolutely appreciate your input at all times. Thanks.
so we have one more, and
Oh, yeah, that's
for the
right.
for
My
the
mistake.
for the folks that came in, I think for this,
My mistake.
maybe we should have considered this one first. So thanks for learning all about consumption lounges in the state of Nevada. But we do have agenda item number 4 on the packaging and labeling of cannabis products.
Thank you. After the last workshop, we were good to go. We're done with cannabis lounges. Again, we're also considering NCCR 12.065, the remediation regulation. NCR 12.065, again, this has been discussed in workshops multiple times. Chief Cronkite and board member Dr. Young were both instrumental in developing the new language for this regulation. Again, if does any of the board members have any questions on the new language?
No, I do not have
And
any questions. Member Merritt.
And I would note that this language was, Dr. Young presented this language at one of the prior board meetings, so it shouldn't be foreign.
Does anybody in Las Vegas office have any comments on 12.065?
Good afternoon. For the record, I'm Kimberly Maxon Rushton with the law firm Cooper Levinson, appearing on behalf of Rad Source Technologies. Chairman Douglas, Director Klimas, as you recall, this regulation came up as a result of a petition that was filed by Rad Source Technologies specific to 12.065, wherein we asked that the original draft be amended and or repealed. As noted by Director Klimas, it has gone through multiple reiterations relative to the language, and I think we're getting closer. But I do believe that based on the comments that I submitted today, and granted they were late, as well as the comments from other similarly situated operators, we still have a ways to go. I think specifically, excuse me, beginning with the title, Cannabis, Remediation and Irradiation. I would specifically recommend that that be changed to decontamination of cannabis. The reason being is that you're calling out irradiation, which is just one form of multiple ways in which cannabis can be decontaminated. Additionally, for the cultivators in the room, they need to know that as a result of this language, if you use anything such as ozone, UA rays, sunlight, lights in general in your grow rooms, you are now required to add this also to your label. And so based on the comments that you heard today about the concerns with adding more and more information to the cannabis labels, I'd ask that you reconsider that based on the fact that, again, this will apply to any type of remediation or decontamination that's used for a plant. Most importantly, I would respectfully submit that the issue here, it seems that the objective here was to ensure that consumers know that their product has been treated and to give them the option of whether or not to utilize that for their own safety. But in reality, the bigger safety issue is if a product hasn't been decontaminated. Because basically what you're saying is that now it's out there and available, and it hasn't been treated, and there is more of a possibility than if it has been decontaminated to a point where you have non-detectable photons, either mold and mildew, aspergillus, and other things that would, I say, be potentially dangerous to a consumer. So based on that, I would respectfully resubmit RAD's request that the regulation be repealed, and or if it is going to be promulgated and move forward, I ask that the Cannabis Board consider further amendments as articulated just now with respect to changing the title. And then also I would note the fact that the terminology relative to the heating process is somewhat of a misnomer because of the fact that that really doesn't apply in this instance. There are multiple processes that involve heat, but the heating process itself is a terminology that isn't applicable in this setting. And so for those reasons, again, reiterate the fact that we would request that the regulation be repealed. Otherwise, that it be tabled and continue to be workshopped until we can come up with a regulation that I think really does meet the intent of the Cannabis Board in ensuring that consumers know what's been treated or how the product has been treated before consumption. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Hello, I'm Jill Ellsworth. I'm the founder and CEO of Willow Industries. I want to start off by thanking the CCB for their time and work on these important matters. I'm here to speak on this final one, 12.065, concerning cannabis remediation and labeling. When I started Willow 6.5 years ago, I was coming directly from the food and beverage industry. With my experience as a registered dietitian holding a master's in food science and nutrition, I built a cold pressed juice company that was widely distributed in national retail chains. My background gave me a very strong understanding of the critical role of kill steps and the importance of consumer safety. This motivated me to build Willow and invent a kill step for the cannabis industry. Willow encourages industry members to move towards CGMP and HACCP standards by proactively treating flower with a kill step. This common practice is normalized in other similar industries, and they're actually a big part of why you trust the consumable goods that you buy and believe are safe. In other industries that are federally regulated, preventative steps are a standard requirement. Milk pasteurization using high heat is a common example. In fact, as consumers, we've come to expect that the products we consume are safe, and that comes with a corresponding label. We believe the proposed draft is an improvement over the previous interactions, but there are still some areas we believe could use clarification. Our primary concern is that the draft regulation seems to use the words decontamination and remediation interchangeably. In cannabis, the term decontamination is frequently synonymous with a kill step or a proactive measure taken by producers to treat all cannabis prior to testing as part of their standard operating procedure. In contrast, Remediation is specifically used when a batch of cannabis fails a contaminant test. And in response to that failed test, the manufacturer treats that product to remove the identified contaminants. Since these terms are not defined in Nevada law, their interchangeable use could cause confusion to the industry and consumers. Instead, we recommend these terms be defined and their meanings differentiated, consistent with industry parlance and other state regulations. Secondly, Willow prioritizes consumer safety and transparency. We generally support labeling requirements that inform consumers about the product they're purchasing, provided the label is accurate. The current draft would require product that underwent a kill step to be labeled with a statement indicating the product has been remediated, conveying to the consumer that the product failed a contaminant test. This would be inaccurate because cannabis that undergoes a kill step would not necessarily have ever failed a test. Therefore, we believe this label should only be required for products that failed a test and were remediated, not products that were decontaminated with a proactive kill step. Like I mentioned, it's common for consumable goods to be labeled with a statement indicating a product has undergone a kill step, providing peace of mind to the consumer and not a black mark against the producer. We appreciate the commission's raising this critical issue, and as the cannabis industry evolves, it will continue to adopt best practices from traditional consumer goods, and it's important our regulations also evolve and be consistent with those best practices. I started Willow to protect consumer safety, and we pride ourselves on working with cultivators and regulators to help promote a safe, compliant, and well-regulated cannabis industry. Thank you so much for your time and consideration.
Thank you. Any other comments in Las Vegas? Any comments in Carson City? Oh, if you guys want to make comment on this, please come forward.
Buzz. My name is Jodeci, and I'm the Executive Administrator for the Chamber of Cannabis. I just wanted to say thank you so much for everything that you guys have been doing, all this hard work. We really appreciate the extensive thought process to ensure diversity and inclusion in the consumption lounge regulations. And as a small business owner, I would really love the opportunity to own an establishment or be a C-level executive. And I also want to simply just thank you all for really just giving the new social equity license piece that will open up opportunities for people just really that have been affected by the unjust cannabis policies. The policies that have been set forth today and that we've gone over, it's just the beginning, and it's exciting to hear. Thank you again, and it's creating change. So thank you for your hard work and dedication. Buzz.
Thank you.
Hi, Amber Jensen. I'm commenting on your 12.065 in the remediation and radiation. Sorry. Anyways, I really appreciate you guys for doing this. Being in the cannabis industry, I understand how important this is. As the gal from Willow just said, maybe some explanation. In my experience, anyone using radiation or ozone treatment are treating it because it failed. So I don't know if there's really people, I don't know why they would treat it if it hasn't failed. But I feel like this is very important. And I don't know, like I just said, I know there's somebody using ozone treatment, and maybe that needs to be listed as well, because it does alter the product. And again, I think it's very important for consumers to know that they are smoking a product that has been treated because it failed. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments here in Las Vegas? Any comments in Carson City? Any other
Yes, good
questions from the board?
afternoon.
Oh, sorry, somebody.
Hello, my name is Katie Hoffman. I'm an attorney at Fenimore Craig, and I am here on behalf of Zeal Equipment Sales and Services to provide comment on Regulation 12.065. Zeal is a leading developer of radio frequency technology, which is used to pasteurize agricultural products like almonds, cashews, sesame and chia seeds, and also cannabis. Zeal appreciates the CCB's work on this labeling issue and supports its efforts to ensure that Nevada consumers have clear and accurate labels on the cannabis products they use and consume. These consumers have a right to understand the characteristics of the products they purchase, and this labeling regulation will really help these consumers make informed choices about what they buy and consume. With that said, we also agree that there are some modifications necessary to really make this labeling regulation clear and effective. In particular, changes are needed to more accurately reflect the various circumstances in which remediation technology is applied. Specifically, we are concerned about the use of the term decontamination. Many cultivators across the state use remediation technology proactively to treat all their cannabis, even cannabis that may be of perfect quality and that would otherwise pass all testing without issue. So applying a label to that cannabis stating that it was contaminated prior to treatment is misleading and could support the use of effective common sense kill steps that promote consumer safety and public health. A good analogy the CCB should look to is pasteurization of food products. The milk or almonds we buy at the store don't advise that they were decontaminated. Similarly, the CCB's labeling language should allow consumers to identify the method of treatment and simply advise that this treatment was applied to promote consumer safety. Use of the term consumer safety is accurate regardless of whether the cannabis was proactively treated or whether it was treated following a testing failure. Additionally, the use of the colloquial term heating to describe remediation processes like radio frequency is also somewhat confusing, I think, for consumers. For radio frequency treatment, the cannabis itself is not warmed like in an oven or a microwave. And those are processes which consumers may associate with degraded quality or potency. So instead of advising consumers that the cannabis was heated prior to their purchase, I think the use of the term thermal is both more precise and avoids confusion and avoids suggesting that the cannabis was previously heated up. Deal has submitted written comments to the board showing these proposed minor tweaks to the regulation. We would be happy to answer any questions from CCB staff or the board, or to have further discussion with CCB staff on these issues. Again, we support the CCB's efforts in this area. It's important that consumers understand that their cannabis was treated and how, and we believe we're getting close to regulations that really carry out that policy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate the comment. Anybody else up in Carson?
No, Mark Carson.
Back to you, Director Clemens.
All right. Well, thanks everybody again for sticking with us. Special thanks to Chair Douglas and members of the board who participated in this and well, we appreciate it. And then obviously the members of the public, some of them who've been with us all day today. So we certainly appreciate that. With that, we will then move on to agenda item number 5. This is the general public comment period, the last general public comment period. It's a free swim. Anything that you would like to provide to us in this public comment period, please in Las Vegas, come up to the podium. Seeing none. And is there any public comment in Carson City?
No public comment in Carson City.
Great. In all seriousness, thank you everybody for participating today, and we are adjourned.